This is the story of Javier, a millionaire from Mérida who adopted two newly born twins without imagining that his decision would lead him to the most shocking meeting of his life. Every afternoon, a homeless woman was walking down the street, staring at the windows of her mansion, with tears falling down her cheeks. What none of them knew was that fate was about to reveal a truth that would change their lives forever. Were those babies the same ones she was desperately looking for? The answer they discovered left them both breathless. Stay until the end, because what this man decided to do when he confirmed the truth will make you believe again in human kindness. Javier never believed in fate until that early morning of March, when his truck skidded on the wet road and turned 3 times before crashing into a light pole. The paramedics said it was a miracle that he survived. 45 years of life passed before his eyes in those seconds of terror. And when he woke up in the hospital 3 days later, with his body full of bandages and his soul full of questions, he knew that something inside him had changed forever. He was no longer the same man who dedicated 18 hours a day to his business. He was no longer the same who avoided emotional commitments because he was afraid of failing. Now lying in that bed, with the smell of disinfectant filling his lungs, Javier understood something fundamental. He had built an empire of money, but he lived in a desert of love. His huge mansion in one of the most beautiful areas of Mérida was empty. The rooms decorated with expensive furniture had never heard the laughter of children. The wide corridors only knew the echo of his lonely steps every night when he returned from work. He had no wife, he had no children. He had no one waiting for him with a sincere smile. The money had given him comfort, but it had not given him purpose. And there, in that hospital bed, with a sore body and an awake heart, he made the most important decision of his entire existence. 2 months after the accident, Javier walked through the corridors of a children's shelter on the outskirts of Mérida. He had started all the legal procedures to adopt. He had gone through interviews, psychological evaluations, and home visits that put his life under the microscope. He didn't care. He wanted to do things right. He wanted to show that he was ready to become a father, even if he had never changed a diaper in his life. The director of the shelter, a 60-year-old woman named Patricia, guided him with slow steps while explaining the available cases. There were children of all ages waiting for a family, but when Patricia opened the door of the newborn area and Javier saw those 2 cribs together with 2 sleeping babies, his heart took a leap that he could not control. They were so small, so fragile, so perfect in their innocence. Patricia approached him with a folder in her hands and told him in a low voice that they were 6 weeks old. They had arrived at the shelter when they were 3 days old. The mother had had serious complications during the birth and could not stay with them. Javier felt a knot in his throat when he looked at those tiny faces. Something inexplicable connected him with those babies, as if the universe was telling him that they were his second chance to do something truly important with his life. Patricia told him that the babies had names since they arrived. The mother had written them down on a piece of wrinkled paper before losing consciousness in the hospital. Mateo and Victoria. Simple names, but full of love. That seemed strange to Javier. Why would a mother who supposedly abandoned her children take the time to write their names so carefully? Patricia shrugged her shoulders and admitted that she had no more information. The hospital only gave the babies a brief note explaining the mother's medical situation and the names written by hand. There were no surnames. There was no address. There was no way to contact her. The hospital's social worker said that the woman was in a homeless condition and that after giving birth, she simply disappeared. Javier felt a pinch of sadness when he imagined that woman's despair. What kind of pain did she have to feel when she separated from her babies? Would she still be alive? Would she think of them every night before sleeping on a cold bench in the city? Those questions went around in his head for days, but in the end he decided that the most important thing was to give Mateo and Victoria the home they deserved. He could not change the past of those children, but he could build them a future full of opportunities and affection. He signed the papers 3 weeks later. He officially became an adoptive father. The day he took the babies home was the most exciting and terrifying day of his life. Javier hired an experienced nurse named Rosa to help him during the first weeks, because frankly, he had no idea what he was doing. Rosa taught him how to prepare the baby bottles at the correct temperature, how to hold the babies so that they would burp after eating, how to change diapers without causing a disaster, and how to recognize the different types of crying. There was the cry of hunger, the cry of sleep, the cry of a dirty diaper, and the cry of, "I just want you to carry me." Javier learned quickly because he had no other option. At 2 a.m, when Mateo cried asking for his milk, and Victoria woke up 5 minutes later doing the same, there was no one else who could help. Rosa went to her house at 8 o'clock in the morning and told him that Javier had babies, that they depended completely on him. The first nights were chaotic. He burned 3 bottles because he put them in the heater for too long. He put the diaper backwards twice, poured milk on his shirt 4 times, but he didn't care. Every time he held those children against his chest and felt their hearts beating next to his, he understood that he had found something that money never gave him. Javier's mansion began to transform into something completely different. The empty rooms, which used to only hold dust, were now full of life. He installed 2 twin beds in the largest room on the 2nd floor, with a view of the garden, where he planned to build an area for games when the children grew up. He bought musical mobiles that hung on the beds, playing soft melodies. He decorated the white walls with murals of forest animals that a local artist painted patiently for a week. The silence that for years was Javier's only companion was now replaced by babbling, laughter, and tears that filled every corner of the house. His business meetings changed schedule to fit the baby's naps. His formal clothes were kept in the closet, while he lived in comfortable milk-stained pants. His old friends stopped inviting him to elegant dinners because they knew that now his priority was Mateo and Victoria. And Javier would not change any of that. For the first time in 45 years, when he opened his eyes every morning to hear the cry asking for breakfast, he really smiled. His house was finally a home. His life finally had meaning. But what Javier did not know was that someone else also thought of Mateo and Victoria every second of the day. 6 weeks passed since Javier became a father, and although the days were exhausting, he had never felt so full. Mateo was starting to smile when he saw familiar faces, and Victoria had a lovely way of holding Javier's finger with her tiny hand every time she was carried. Rosa kept coming 3 times a week to help with the baths and give him useful tips on raising a child. One afternoon in April, while they were preparing the bottles in the kitchen, Rosa noticed that Javier was quieter than usual. He had his eyes lost in the window, thinking of something that clearly worried him. Rosa dried her hands on her apron and asked him what was wrong. Javier sighed deeply and confessed that he could not stop thinking about the mother of the children. It seemed unfair to him that that woman never knew that her babies were well cared for, healthy, and loved. Rosa put a hand on his shoulder and said something that was etched in his soul. She said that true love does not always express itself by staying. Sometimes it is expressed by letting go when you know that you cannot give what your children need. Perhaps that mother made the bravest act of her life by making sure that Mateo and Victoria had an opportunity that she could not give them. Javier understood the logic of those words, but his heart still felt a deep sadness for the unknown woman. One night, while the babies were sleeping after their last milk of the day, Javier opened the drawer of the room where he kept the adoption documents. He took out the folder and read each page carefully, looking for any detail that had gone overlooked. The hospital report was brief and cold, written in medical language that turned a human drama into simple clinical data. It said that the mother had arrived alone at the hospital in advanced labor. She did not have an ID, did not give a full name, only said that her name was Camila. She had a complicated twin birth that ended in emergency cesarean section. She lost a lot of blood. She went into induced coma to stabilize her. When she woke up 4 days later, the babies had already been transferred to the infant shelter because there were no relatives to take care of them, and she was not able to sign papers or make decisions. The hospital tried to locate her after giving her the doctor's note, but she never returned for her belongings or asked for the children. The social worker noted in the file that she was probably a homeless person who did not have the resources to raise 2 babies. Case closed. But for Javier, it was not closed. There was something in that story that did not fit. A mother who takes the time to write the names of her children is not a mother who simply forgets about them. There had to be more. There had to be an explanation that no one bothered to look for. The next day, Javier decided to go personally to the hospital where Mateo and Victoria were born. He left the babies with Rosa and drove to the General Hospital of Mérida, a large building full of people who seemed to never stop. In the social work area, a 30-year-old woman named Gabriela kindly attended him when he explained that he was the adoptive father of twins born there 3 months ago. Gabriela reviewed the computer system and confirmed that she remembered the case. Javier told her exactly what the paper said. The mother had disappeared without a trace after the doctor's appointment. Javier asked if anyone had tried to look for her in the streets, in the shelters for homeless people, somewhere where she could be. Gabriela denied with her head. It was not the hospital's responsibility to follow up once the patients left. In addition, the woman had signed a paper allowing the babies to be given in adoption before falling into a coma. That was enough legally. Javier was frustrated by so much bureaucracy, but he also understood that the system was designed to protect children, not to solve mysteries. He thanked Gabriela and left the hospital with more questions than answers. As he walked to his truck under the scorching sun of Mérida, he wondered if one day he would know the complete truth about the woman who gave his children life. Months passed, and Javier was completely immersed in his new reality as a father. Mateo and Victoria grew up fast. They already held their heads, laughed at jokes when he played with them, and began to hum sounds that would one day become words. Javier spoke to them in Spanish all the time. He sang them traditional songs that his own mother sang to him when he was a child. And every night before going to sleep, he read them stories even though he knew they didn't understand the stories yet. He only cared that they listened to his voice full of love. Rosa had told him that the first few years are crucial for the emotional development of the children, and Javier was determined to give them all the security and affection they needed. He hired an excellent pediatrician who visited the house every month to make sure that everything was fine with the twins' growth. He installed security cameras in the children's room to monitor them while they slept. He changed his diet to cook healthier meals now that he had to set an example. His entire life revolved around those two little beings who had filled the void that he didn't even know he had. On the weekends, he took them to the park in his double stroller, walked through the trees in the neighborhood, and greeted the neighbors who stopped to admire the babies. It seemed that he had finally found peace, but the peace was about to break into 1,000 pieces. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Javier noticed something strange when he returned from a date with the doctor. As he parked his truck in front of the house, he saw a thin woman walking slowly down the sidewalk on the other side of the street. It wasn't unusual. The neighborhood was quiet and people used to walk around. But there was something about the way that woman moved that caught his attention. She walked slowly, almost dragging her feet, with her eyes fixed on the houses. Her clothes were dirty and torn. Her long, dark hair fell messy on her shoulders. It was obvious that she lived in the streets. Javier watched her for a few seconds before taking the babies out of the truck. The woman stopped right in front of his house, looked up at the windows on the second floor where the children's room was, and stood there without moving. Javier felt a chill run down his back. It wasn't a casual look. It was an intense, desperate look, as if she was looking for something she had lost. When Javier closed the truck door with a loud bang, the woman was startled, lowered her head quickly, and kept walking down the street. Javier entered the house with the babies in his arms, but he couldn't get that image out of his head. He had seen sadness in those eyes. He had seen tears shining under the sunlight, and something inside him, something he couldn't explain with words, told him that woman would return. He didn't know how right he was. Javier's routine changed completely in the following months. Every morning, he woke up before dawn to the sound of Mateo asking for his first milk of the day. Victoria usually woke up 10 minutes later, as if they had a synchronized internal clock. Javier learned to prepare 2 bottles at the same time, one in each hand, while he heated the water on the stove and checked the temperature with the back of his wrist, as Rosa had taught him. He no longer needed written instructions or internet videos. His hands moved with confidence, knowing exactly what to do at every moment. After breakfast, it was playtime on the soft rug in the living room, where the babies practiced lifting their heads and rolling onto their sides. Javier would lie on the floor next to them, making funny faces that made them laugh out loud, and felt his heart melt every time those giggles filled the house. Then came the warm baths in the special baby tub, with rubber ducks floating around while he washed their hair with tear-free shampoo. Mateo loved the water and splashed with his chubby legs. Victoria was calmer, observing everything with her big, curious eyes. After the bath, Javier dressed them in comfortable cotton clothes. No expensive brands or flashy outfits. He just wanted them to be happy and comfortable. The afternoons passed between short naps, more bottles, and walks through the garden in a double stroller that Javier pushed under the shade of the mango trees. The neighbors in the gated community had already gotten used to seeing him walking with the twins. Doña Lucia, an older lady who lived 3 houses down, always stopped to admire the babies and tell Javier that he looked radiant in his new role as a dad. Don Roberto, the owner of the corner store, gave him popsicles every time he passed by, even though Javier explained with a laugh that the children couldn't eat sweets yet. Life in that quiet Mérida neighborhood was perfect for raising a family. The streets were clean, the gardens well kept, and there was a sense of community that Javier never experienced when he lived alone, focused on his business. Now he knew his neighbors by name. Now he participated in the neighborhood parties. Now he understood that true wealth was not in his bank account, but in the tight hugs of 2 children who depended completely on him. His assistant at the office had gotten used to Javier canceling meetings when the babies were sick or had an appointment with the pediatrician. His partners understood that his priority had changed, and Javier didn't apologize for that. The nights were his favorite time of the day. After the last milk feeding, Javier carried Mateo in one arm and Victoria in the other. He walked slowly around the room while humming traditional Mexican songs that his grandmother sang to him when he was little. The lights in the room were dim. Only a soft lamp in the corner illuminated the walls decorated with forest animals. The babies relaxed with the movement. Their little bodies became heavy against Javier's chest, and little by little, their eyes closed until they were fast asleep. In those moments of silence, Javier reflected on how much his existence had changed in such a short time. A year ago, he was alone in that huge house, working until midnight, eating takeout in front of the computer, with no one to share his achievements or his failures with. Now he had 2 reasons to get up every morning with energy, 2 reasons to be a better person, 2 reasons to believe that the accident that almost cost him his life was actually the awakening he needed. He placed the babies in their cribs with care, kissed them on the forehead, and whispered that he loved them more than anything in the world. He left the room walking on tiptoes so as not to make noise, left the door ajar, and went down to the living room where he could finally sit on the sofa and take a deep breath. He was tired, but it was a tiredness full of purpose. However, there was something that kept worrying him. During the last 3 weeks, Javier had seen the homeless woman walking down his street again. Not every day, but often enough to realize it wasn't a coincidence. Always at the same time, around 5 in the afternoon, when the sun began to go down and the shadows lengthened on the sidewalks. Always with the same dirty clothes and the same messy hair. Always staring at the houses, especially his. Javier watched her from the living room window, hidden behind the curtain, so she wouldn't see him. The woman would stop in front of his garden, look up at the second-floor windows where the children's rooms were, and stand there for several minutes. Javier noticed that her lips moved, as if she were talking to herself, or maybe praying. He noticed that she wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. He noticed that her entire posture reflected a sadness so deep that it hurt his soul just to see her. At first, he thought about calling private security to report a suspicious person, but something stopped him. That woman didn't seem dangerous. She seemed lost. She seemed broken. And every time he saw her walking away down the street with her shoulders slumped, Javier felt an urgent need to do something, even though he didn't know exactly what. One rainy afternoon in June, while preparing dinner in the kitchen with the babies playing in the playpen nearby, Javier made a decision. He couldn't keep ignoring that woman. He needed to know who she was and why she spent so much time watching his house. Maybe she needed help. Maybe she was sick. Maybe she just needed someone to ask her if she was okay. Javier put the baby's food in the refrigerator, carried Mateo and Victoria, one in each arm, and went out to the front garden just as the woman appeared at the end of the street. It was raining lightly, those fine drops that get you wet without you noticing. The woman walked with her head down, her bare feet stepping in the puddles, without caring. When she arrived in front of Javier's house and looked up at the windows as she always did, her eyes met directly with his. Both froze. Javier saw panic on her face. He saw she was about to run away. But before she could move, he raised a hand in a gesture of peace and told her with a soft voice not to be afraid. The babies in his arms began to move restlessly because of the rain. The woman looked at the children, then looked at Javier, and something in her expression changed. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. Her lips trembled. And in that moment, Javier knew with absolute certainty that there was a story behind that look, a story that was about to change everything. Javier quickly took the babies into the house to protect them from the rain. But before closing the door, he told the woman to wait a moment. He didn't really know what he was doing or why. He just knew he couldn't leave her standing there in the rain. He ran in, placed Mateo and Victoria in their playpen with their favorite toys, and took a clean towel and an old sweater from his closet. When he returned to the garden, the woman was still there completely motionless, as if she didn't know whether she should stay or go. Javier approached slowly, without making sudden movements that could scare her. He extended the towel and the sweater with a kind smile. She looked at him with distrust at first, but then accepted the things with trembling hands. She dried her face and put the sweater over her wet clothes. It was several sizes too big for her. It fit her like a long dress covering her down to her knees. Javier noticed how thin she was, as if she hadn't eaten well in months. Her brown skin was tanned by the intense sun of the streets. She had small scars on her arms, probably from falls or scratches, but what impacted him most were her eyes. Behind the exhaustion and dirt, there was a clear intelligence. There was dignity. There was humanity. She wasn't just a homeless woman. She was a person with a history, and Javier needed to hear it. He asked her what her name was. She took several seconds to answer, as if she had forgotten she had a name. Finally, she whispered in a hoarse voice that her name was Camila. Javier felt that name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place where from. He asked her if she was hungry. Camila nodded slightly, without daring to ask for anything. Javier told her to come into the house, but she stepped back immediately, shaking her head. She couldn't come in. She was very dirty. She didn't want to dirty anything. Javier insisted with patience. He told her he didn't care about the dirt, that he had a washing machine and plenty of soap, that the important thing was for her to eat something hot. Camila looked at him with tears in her eyes, as if she couldn't believe someone was offering her kindness without expecting anything in return. Finally, she accepted, but stayed in the entryway without daring to go further. Javier brought her a plate with rice, beans, stewed chicken, and freshly made tortillas that he had bought at the neighborhood tortilla shop that morning. Camila ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it were the best banquet in the world. Javier sat on the entrance step with her, maintaining a respectful distance without pressuring her with questions. Inside, the babies babbled, playing with their rattles. The sound of those innocent voices seemed to mesmerize Camila. She stopped eating halfway through the plate and turned her head toward the interior of the house. Her eyes desperately sought to see the children. Javier noticed her reaction and felt a shiver run down his spine. He asked her carefully why she spent so much time on his street. Camila lowered her gaze to the empty plate in her hands and remained silent for what seemed like an eternity. Javier didn't pressure her. He waited patiently, giving her the space she needed to find the words. Finally, Camila looked up and looked him straight in the eyes. Her voice came out broken, full of a pain so deep that Javier felt it pierce his chest. She told him she was looking for her babies, 2 twins, a boy and a girl, who were born 4 months ago at the General Hospital of Mérida. She was told they were given up for adoption, but no one told her where they were or with whom. She had been walking through different neighborhoods of the city for months, observing the houses where she saw cribs in the windows or heard babies crying. She hoped that one day, somehow, the universe would guide her to her children. She just wanted to see them once. She just wanted to know that they were alive and well cared for. She didn't expect to get them back. She knew she had no way to raise them, but she needed the peace of knowing that someone else was giving them the love she couldn't give them. Tears ran freely down her cheeks as she spoke. Javier felt the world stop around him. His heart was beating so hard he could hear it in his ears. Twins, a boy and a girl. General Hospital, 4 months ago. He tried to stay calm, even though inside he was shaking. He asked Camila to tell him more about what happened. She took a deep breath and began to recount her story with a broken voice. She said she had been living on the streets for 2 years, after losing her job as a domestic worker, when the family she worked for moved to Cancun and didn't take her with them. She had no family in Mérida. Her parents died when she was young, and she never had siblings. She met a man who promised to help her, but only used her and left her pregnant before disappearing. When she discovered she was expecting twins, she tried to find work anywhere. But no one hires a pregnant woman living on the street. She spent the 9 months sleeping in shelters, eating what they gave her in churches, taking care of her belly the best she could. When labor started, she walked alone to the hospital because she didn't have money for a taxi. The doctors told her she had serious complications, that she needed an emergency C-section. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was writing her baby's names on a piece of paper a nurse gave her, Mateo and Victoria, names she had chosen months ago while sleeping on park benches. When she woke up 4 days later, they were gone. They told her they had been taken to a children's shelter because she couldn't take care of them in her condition. She signed papers she didn't understand well because she was groggy from the medicine. And since that day, she hadn't stopped looking for them. Javier couldn't breathe. He felt the floor moving under his feet. Camila was describing exactly the story he read in the adoption documents. The homeless mother who went into a coma. The babies taken to the shelter. The names written on paper. Everything matched perfectly. But it couldn't be true. It couldn't be that the woman who had been watching his house for weeks was the biological mother of Mateo and Victoria. The universe couldn't be so cruel and so perfect at the same time. He needed to be sure before saying anything that would change everything forever. With a trembling voice, Javier asked Camila if she remembered the exact names she gave her babies. She closed her eyes and whispered, as if it were a prayer. Mateo and Victoria. Mateo because she liked how strong yet tender it sounded. Victoria because it meant triumph, and she wanted her daughter to triumph in life even if she had failed. Javier felt tears welling up in his eyes without being able to control them. He stood up abruptly. He needed to move. He needed to think. He needed to process what was happening. Camila looked at him scared, thinking she had said something wrong. She asked him if he was okay. Javier didn't answer. He walked toward the entrance of the house. He looked toward the playpen where Mateo and Victoria were playing happily, knowing nothing of the complicated world of adults. He looked again at Camila, who was still sitting on the step with a wet towel in her hands, and in that moment, he knew that their lives, his, the baby's, and that broken woman's, were connected in a way he never imagined. The truth was right in front of him, waiting to be recognized. Javier needed to think clearly, but his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was the immense happiness of being the father of Mateo and Victoria, two children who had filled his life with meaning and purpose. On the other hand, there was Camila, a woman shattered by the circumstances life put in front of her, desperately searching for the children she never stopped loving. Javier knew he had to handle the situation with extreme care. He couldn't just tell her the truth without being completely sure. He needed medical confirmation. He needed proof. He needed time to process what it would mean for everyone if his suspicions were correct. He asked Camila to wait a moment while he went into the house. She nodded, confused, not understanding what was happening. Javier walked to the study, where he kept all important documents in a metal filing cabinet. He took out the adoption folder with trembling hands and looked for the hospital report. There was the name, Camila. No surname, no further information. But it was her. It had to be her. The hospital mentioned was the same. The dates matched perfectly. The babies' names were identical. The description of the birth circumstances fit with what Camila had just told him. There was no way it was a coincidence. Fate had brought the biological mother of his children directly to his door. After months of searching for them all over the city, he returned to the garden where Camila was still sitting on the step, hugging herself because it was starting to get cold with the rain. Javier sat next to her, maintaining a respectful distance, but shortening the space between them. He asked her if she would be willing to undergo some medical tests to confirm her identity. Camila looked at him with eyes full of hope, mixed with fear. She asked him if that meant he knew something about her babies. Javier didn't want to give her false hope, but he couldn't lie to her either. He told her in a soft voice that there was a possibility, just a possibility, that the babies she was looking for were closer than she thought. But they needed to be sure before saying anything definitive. Camila began to cry uncontrollably, covering her mouth with both hands to make no noise. Her entire body shook with silent sobs she had been holding back for months. Javier felt the impulse to hug her, to comfort her, but he didn't know if it would be appropriate. Instead, he put a gentle hand on her shoulder and promised her that they would discover the truth together. He told her that no matter what happened, he would help her. He wouldn't let her keep living on the streets. He wouldn't let her keep suffering alone. Camila looked up at him with an expression of such deep gratitude that it broke his heart. The next day, Javier made an urgent appointment with the twins' pediatrician, Dr. Mendez, a serious but compassionate woman who had attended to Mateo and Victoria since they came into his life. He explained the situation over the phone, and she agreed to see them that same afternoon in her private office. Javier stopped by the shelter where Camila had slept the night before, after he insisted on paying for a night in a safe place. She came out clean, wearing the same sweater he had given her, but with her face washed and her hair combed back. She looked different, younger, more human. Javier calculated she must be around 35 years old, although the streets had aged her prematurely. They got into his truck and drove in silence toward the office. Camila looked out the window with an absent expression, lost in her thoughts. Javier wanted to say something comforting, but he couldn't find the right words. In the back seat, Mateo and Victoria were in their car seats, babbling and playing with their feet. Camila turned her head to look at them, and her eyes filled with tears again. She extended a trembling hand toward the back, as if wanting to touch them, but without daring to. Javier noticed the gesture and felt a lump in his throat. If the tests confirmed what he already knew in his heart, what would happen next? How would they explain this impossible situation? How would they build a path together? At the office, Dr. Mendez received them with professionalism, but also with human warmth. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, taking notes in her notebook. Then she examined the babies and took the blood samples from both them and Camila to do the DNA tests. She explained that the results would take approximately a week, but that she could also do blood type analysis that same day, which would give preliminary indicators. Camila accepted whatever they asked. She was willing to do anything just to know the truth. While they waited for the preliminary results in the waiting room, Javier asked Camila more about her life before ending up on the streets. She told him she grew up in a small town near Valladolid, that her parents were humble farmers who died in an accident when she was 18. She came to Mérida looking for better opportunities. She found work cleaning houses. She saved every peso she earned, dreaming of studying nursing one day. But life had other plans. The family she worked for moved suddenly. She met the wrong man at the wrong time, and everything collapsed like a house of cards. Javier listened attentively, discovering that Camila was not what society labels as a homeless person. She was an intelligent, hard-working woman who simply had bad luck, and that made him respect her even more. 2 hours later, Dr. Mendez returned to the waiting room with a folder in her hands and a serious expression on her face. Javier stood up immediately, his heart beating so hard he felt everyone in the room could hear it. Camila also stood up, holding on to the arm of the chair because her legs barely supported her. The doctor invited them into her private office. She closed the door behind them and asked them to sit down. The silence in that room was so heavy, Javier could feel it pressing against his chest. The doctor opened the folder, reviewed the papers with a careful expression, and finally looked up at them. She told them that the preliminary blood type analyses were highly compatible. The twins had type O positive, inherited from a mother with the same blood type. Camila had exactly that type. The statistical odds that she wasn't the biological mother were practically non-existent. They would need to wait for the DNA tests to have 100% absolute confirmation. But from a medical point of view, everything indicated that Camila was indeed Mateo and Victoria's mother. Javier's world stopped completely. He heard the doctor's words as if they came from far away, distorted, unreal. He looked at Camila and saw she was crying silently, with her hands covering her face. He looked at the babies sleeping peacefully in their carriers, oblivious to the revolution that had just shaken the lives of the adults around them. And in that moment, Javier knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The truth he sought had finally arrived, and now he had to decide what to do with it. Javier left Dr. Mendez's office, feeling like he was walking in a thick fog. His mind processed millions of thoughts at the same time. On one hand, he had legally adopted those babies. He had all the signed and certified papers that made him their father before the law. On the other hand, the biological mother, who supposedly had disappeared without a trace, was there, alive, searching for them desperately for months. Camila hadn't abandoned her children for lack of love. She had lost them due to circumstances beyond her control. She had signed papers in a state of medical confusion, without fully understanding what they meant. And now she was there, with medical proof confirming that Mateo and Victoria were hers. Javier knew that legally he had every right to keep the children. Camila had signed the adoption authorization, but morally, could he really deny a mother the right to know her children? Could he live with himself knowing he had found them, but decided to keep silent? They got into the truck in silence. Camila kept crying quietly, wiping her tears with the sweater Javier had given her. He drove aimlessly for several minutes. He just needed to move, think, process. Finally, he stopped at a quiet park near downtown Mérida. He turned off the engine and stayed with his hands on the steering wheel, breathing deeply. Camila broke the silence with a trembling voice. She asked him directly if the babies in the back seat were her children. Javier closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that question crushing his chest. He couldn't lie. Not after everything they had discovered. He turned in his seat to face her, and with a firm voice but full of emotion, he told her the truth. He told her yes, that Mateo and Victoria were the twins she had searched for all over the city during 4 endless months. That he had legally adopted them from the children's shelter without ever knowing their mother was alive and looking for them. That the system had failed them all by not making a real effort to locate her before giving the babies up for adoption. Camila covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes went wide, and a heartbreaking sound came out of her throat. It was a cry that came from the depths of her soul. A cry she had been holding back since the day she woke up in the hospital and was told her babies were gone. She leaned forward, hugging herself, shaking completely. Javier extended a hand and put it on her shoulder, letting her cry all she needed. There were no words that could comfort that pain. He could only be there, present, as a witness to her suffering. After several minutes, Camila calmed down enough to speak between broken sobs. She told Javier she wasn't coming to take the children away. She knew she had no way to take care of them. She didn't have a house. She didn't have a job. She didn't have money to buy even a diaper. She just wanted to see them. She just wanted to know they were okay. She just needed the peace of confirming that they had found a good home with someone who truly loved them. She thanked him for taking care of them, for giving them what she couldn't give them. She told him it was evident that Javier loved them because it showed in how he held them, in how he spoke to them, in how he protected them. A father who loves isn't noticed in words. He is noticed in actions. and Javier's actions spoke louder than any speech. Camila told him through tears that she only had one request. She wanted to see them up close once. She wanted to touch their little hands. She wanted to tell them that their mom never stopped looking for them, never stopped loving them, and that even though she couldn't be with them, she would always carry them in her heart. After that, she promised she would disappear forever. She wouldn't cause problems. She wouldn't interfere in their lives. She just wanted that moment of goodbye that fate stole from her when she went into a coma. Javier felt tears running down his own face while listening to Camila's words. He understood he was facing a maternal love so pure and selfless, it left him breathless. That woman was willing to give up everything so her children could be happy. Javier took a deep breath and made the hardest decision of his life. He told Camila to get out of the truck. She looked at him confused and scared, thinking he was kicking her out. But he got out too. He walked to the back side where the car seats were, and with careful hands unbuckled Mateo and Victoria's seatbelts. The babies were awake now, looking around with curiosity. Javier carried Mateo in one arm and signaled Camila to come closer. She walked slowly, as if in a trance, unable to believe what was happening. When she was close enough, Javier extended Mateo toward her. Camila shook completely, extended her arms with infinite care, and received her son for the first time in 4 months. The baby looked at her with his big dark eyes, studying that unknown face. Camila brought him to her chest, buried her nose in his soft hair, and cried like she had never cried in her life. She murmured broken words in a low voice. She told him she was so sorry, that she never wanted to leave him, that she loved him more than anything in the universe. Mateo, without understanding anything but feeling the emotion, put his chubby little hand on Camila's wet cheek. That simple gesture made her cry even harder. Javier took Victoria out of the carrier and handed her over as well. Now Camila had her 2 children in her arms, one on each side, and her face reflected a mixture of happiness, pain, and gratitude that Javier would never forget. It was the reunion she had begged heaven for during endless months. They remained in that park for over an hour. Camila sat on a bench under the shade of a ceiba tree, with Mateo and Victoria on her lap, simply looking at them, touching their little faces, counting their little fingers, memorizing every detail. She spoke to them in a soft voice, sang them lullabies her own mother sang to her when she was a girl. The babies seemed calm with her, as if on some deep level they recognized that voice, that smell, that connection that goes beyond conscious memory. Javier watched them from a certain distance, giving them space, but staying close in case they needed anything. He saw how Camila kissed their foreheads with infinite tenderness. He saw how she whispered to them to be happy, to grow strong, to never forget that their mom loved them since before they were born. He saw how finally, with superhuman effort, she returned them to their carriers because she knew it was time to go. She stood up with difficulty, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She thanked Javier for that priceless gift. She told him that now she could live in peace, knowing her babies were in good hands. She turned to leave, walking slowly like someone who has just handed over her heart and doesn't know how to go on living without it. But before she could get more than 5 steps away, Javier called her with a firm voice. She stopped without turning around, fearing he would ask her never to return. But what Javier said next changed everything. He told her not to go, that they had to talk about the future, that there was another option neither of them had considered yet. If you are liking this story, don't forget to like this video. Remember that true love always finds a way to reunite those destined to be together. Camila stood paralyzed when she heard Javier's words. She turned slowly, her face still wet with tears, and looked at him with a mixture of confusion and hope. She didn't understand what other option could exist. For her, everything was clear. Javier was the legal father of the children. He had resources, stability, and love to give them. She had nothing but her broken heart and her empty arms. But something in Javier's expression told her that what he was about to propose was something she would have never imagined. He walked toward her with firm steps, stood face to face, maintaining a respectful distance, and spoke to her with a voice full of conviction that left no room for doubts. He told her he had spent the last 4 months being a father to Mateo and Victoria, loving them with every fiber of his being, building a life around them, but that in those last hours he had understood something fundamental. Those children didn't lose their mother. Their mother never stopped looking for them, and he had no right to keep them separated just because the legal system gave him that power. The babies deserved to grow up knowing the woman who gave them life. They deserved to know they were loved since before birth. They deserved to have their mother in their lives in some way. And Camila deserved the opportunity to recover what circumstances unjustly snatched from her. Camila shook her head while tears ran down her cheeks again. She told Javier she appreciated his words more than she could express, but there was no possible way that could work. She lived on the streets. She didn't have a peso in her pocket. She had no formal education beyond elementary school. She couldn't give those children even a tenth of what he could offer them. It would be selfish of her to want to be in their lives when she would only bring them problems and limitations. Javier interrupted her firmly, but with kindness. He told her he wasn't proposing she take the children. He was proposing something completely different, something that required courage, trust, and the willingness to build something new together. He asked her if she would be willing to stay, to live in his house, to recover physically and emotionally, to study, work, and rebuild her life, while they raised Mateo and Victoria together. Not as husband and wife, he clarified quickly so there wouldn't be confusion, but as two people who loved the same children and who could give them something better, united than separated. He had the resources and stability. She had the maternal love and biological connection. Together they could create an unconventional family, but one full of true love. Camila looked at him as if he were speaking another language. She couldn't process what she was hearing. A millionaire was offering to share his home and his children without asking for anything in return. Javier continued speaking before she could reject the offer out of pure shock. He explained he had a huge mansion with empty rooms that were never used, that he could give her her own private space where she could feel safe and comfortable, that he could help her get her legal documents, enroll her in educational programs, connect her with job opportunities when she was ready, that the only thing he asked in return was that she commit to being the best version of herself for the sake of the children, that he wasn't rescuing her out of pity. He was proposing an alliance based on mutual love for Mateo and Victoria. The babies needed stability, yes, But they also needed to know their mother. They needed to grow up seeing that the world can be bigger than the labels society puts on people. They needed to learn that family is built with love, not just with blood or legal papers. Camila let herself fall onto the park bench because her legs wouldn't support her anymore. She put her trembling hands over her face and cried with an intensity that scared the babies. Mateo started to pout from his carrier. Victoria began to get restless. Javier quickly crouched next to Camila and put a comforting hand on her back. He told her she didn't have to decide right then, to take the time she needed to think, but to please consider the proposal seriously, because this was the opportunity the universe was giving them to do things right. That night, Javier installed Camila in one of the guest rooms of his mansion. It was a spacious and bright room with a private bathroom, large windows overlooking the garden, and a comfortable bed with clean sheets that smelled of fabric softener. Camila entered the room, walking as if in a dream. She touched the walls, looked at the furniture, turned on the faucet just to see clean water running. It had been more than 2 years since she slept in a real bed. It had been more than 2 years since she had a safe roof over her head. Javier brought her clean clothes he had quickly bought at a downtown store. Nothing luxurious, just the basics: comfortable sweatpants, cotton t-shirts, new underwear, soft flip-flops. He showed her how the shower worked. He gave her fluffy towels and lavender-scented soap. He told her to take all the time she needed to bathe and rest, that the babies were well taken care of, that she could relax for the first time in a long time. Camila looked at him with eyes full of gratitude and something deeper she couldn't name yet. She whispered a thank you so full of emotion that Javier felt a lump form in his throat. He left the room and closed the door to give her privacy. He walked to the twins' room, where he had already put them in their cribs after giving them their night milk. He stood there in the dark, listening to their soft and rhythmic breathing, and wondered if he was doing the right thing or making the biggest mistake of his life. The following days were an adjustment period for everyone. Camila woke up every morning, unable to believe she wasn't on the street. She showered for a long time under the hot water, still processing that this was real. She went down to the kitchen where Javier was already preparing bottles for the babies and stayed in the doorway without daring to enter completely. Javier invited her with kind gestures to sit at the table, served her coffee with milk and fresh sweetbread he bought at the neighborhood bakery. At first, they ate in awkward silence, not knowing what to say to each other, but little by little, they began to talk about simple things: the weather, the baby's routines, small, unimportant anecdotes. Camila observed everything attentively, noticed how Javier held the children, how he spoke to them with infinite patience, how he made sure they were comfortable before thinking of himself. It was evident that this man loved Mateo and Victoria with all his heart. That gave her peace, knowing that during the months she searched desperately for them in the streets, they were safe and loved. Javier also observed Camila. He noticed how her eyes lit up every time she saw the babies. He noticed how she extended her hands wanting to hold them, but without daring to ask for permission. He noticed how she hummed lullabies when she thought no one was listening, and he understood he had made the right decision. Those children needed both of them in their lives. A week later, the definitive DNA test results arrived. Javier and Camila went together to Dr. Mendez's office to receive official confirmation. Although both already knew in their hearts what the result would be, They needed that paper that made it indisputable before any authority. The doctor opened the envelope carefully, read the results with a neutral expression, and then looked up at them with a small smile. She confirmed what they already knew. The probability of maternity was 99.9%. Camila was, without any possible doubt, the biological mother of Mateo and Victoria. The official document was there, printed on paper with the certified lab seal. Camila took the paper with trembling hands and read it over and over, as if the words would change if she looked at them enough times. They were her children. Officially, legally, scientifically, she had never been crazy. She'd never imagined things. Her babies existed, and she had found them against all odds. She hugged the paper against her chest and cried silently. Javier put a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of support. Dr. Mendez explained that now they had to decide what to do with that information from a legal point of view. Camila could technically fight for custody, arguing she signed the adoption papers under medical duress. But both knew that wasn't the path they wanted to take. They left the office and walked to a quiet cafe near the historic center of Mérida. They ordered coffee and cornbread, sat at a table by the window where sunlight came in, and finally had the conversation they had been avoiding for days. Javier spoke first. He told Camila he understood perfectly if she wanted to legally reclaim her children, that he wouldn't blame her or fight against her, that he would do everything possible to facilitate the process and ensure she had the necessary resources to care for them. Camila interrupted him quickly. She told him she didn't want to take the children away from him, that she had seen during that week what a good father he was, that Mateo and Victoria loved him. That was evident in how they smiled when they saw him, in how they calmed down with his voice. She couldn't destroy that relationship just because biology was on her side. Besides, she still had no job or resources of her own. She was barely starting to rebuild her life with the help Javier was generously giving her. It made no sense to rip the children from the only stability they knew to take them to an uncertain situation. Javier breathed with relief, but also with some sadness. He thanked her for being so mature and thinking of the children's well-being first. Then he made her a formal proposal. He suggested they keep the legal adoption in his name, but establish a private agreement where Camila was recognized as the biological mother with all visitation rights, that they raise the children together as co-parents under the same roof. Camila processed Javier's words carefully. She asked him why he was willing to do all this, why a man with his money and social position would risk his reputation having a woman who lived on the streets under his roof. Javier remained silent for a moment, stirring his coffee with the spoon while searching for the right words. Finally, he looked up and spoke to her with brutal honesty. He told her that before the accident that almost cost him his life, he was an empty man who only knew how to work and accumulate money without real purpose. That adopting Mateo and Victoria gave him a meaning he never had. But knowing Camila's story taught him something even more important. It taught him that life can be cruel and unfair to the people who deserve it least. That a woman can lose everything and still keep getting up every day to look for her children. That maternal love is stronger than any external circumstance, and that he had the opportunity to use his resources to do something truly meaningful. Not just raise children, but help rebuild a family the system broke. Also, he confessed something that had been worrying him. He told her the children would one day grow up and ask questions about their mother, and he preferred to be able to tell them the truth, tell them their mom searched for them tirelessly, that she never stopped loving them, and that when they reunited, they decided to raise them together. That was a story of love and redemption worth building. Camila listened with tears running down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of gratitude and hope instead of pain. She told Javier she accepted his proposal, that she would stay in his house and work hard to become the best version of herself, that she would take advantage of all the opportunities he was giving her to study and grow, that she wouldn't disappoint him. Javier smiled warmly and told her she was already doing well just by getting up every day and moving forward despite everything, that the only thing he asked was for her to be patient with herself during the healing process, that the trauma of living on the streets doesn't disappear overnight, that she would need time to trust life again, and that he would be there to support her every step of the way. He extended his hand across the table in a gesture of alliance. Camila took it firmly. It was a handshake sealing a pact between two people who barely knew each other, but were united by love for two little human beings. They left the cafe with a sense of peace neither had felt in a long time. They walked through the cobblestone streets of the historic center. They passed in front of the yellow cathedral, shining under the sun, and bought tropical-flavored popsicles from a street cart. It was a simple, everyday moment, almost normal. But for both, it meant the beginning of something completely new, a family that fate destroyed, and that love was rebuilding piece by piece. That night, when they returned to the mansion, Javier had an idea. He called Camila to the living room after putting the babies to bed in their cribs. She came down with a curious expression and a little nervous, not knowing what to expect. Javier had prepared 2 cups of hot chocolate with cinnamon, a custom his grandmother taught him for important nights. They sat on the sofa with the steaming cups in their hands, and Javier began to talk about the future. He told her that the next day they would go together to process her identity documents she had lost when she ended up on the street, that he would enroll her in an adult education program where she could finish her middle school and accelerated high school, that he had contacts in several companies that could give her part-time work when she was ready, that meanwhile, her job would be to help take care of the babies and focus on her own recovery. Camila listened attentively, feeling that for the first time in years, someone believed in her. Javier asked her what she would like to study if she had the opportunity. She lowered her gaze shyly and confessed she always dreamed of being a nurse. She wanted to help sick people, give back to the world some of the kindness that had been denied to her for so long. Javier smiled broadly and promised her he would help her achieve that dream, that it wouldn't be easy or fast, but they would achieve it together. Camila felt something warm expand in her chest. It was hope. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, her life wasn't over. Maybe it was just really beginning. 6 months passed since that rainy afternoon when Javier found Camila standing in front of his house with tears in her eyes. 6 months that completely transformed everyone's life in that mansion in Mérida. Camila was no longer the emaciated and broken woman who lived on the streets. Now she had long, shiny hair, tied back in a ponytail, healthy skin with natural color in her cheeks, and a light in her eyes that had been extinguished for years. She had finished middle school with excellent grades in the accelerated program and was now studying high school in the afternoons. She dedicated her mornings to taking care of Mateo and Victoria While Javier worked from his home office, the babies were 10 months old, and at that adorable stage where everything caused them curiosity, Mateo had learned to crawl and explored every corner of the living room with determination. Victoria preferred to sit observing the world with those big, intelligent eyes she inherited from her mother. Camila sang traditional songs to them while playing with them on the rug. She prepared their baby food with fresh vegetables from the market and read them children's stories with funny voices that made them laugh out loud. Javier watched these scenes from the door of his office and felt a warmth in his chest he had never experienced before. This was the family he never knew he needed. The dynamic between Javier and Camila had evolved naturally during those months. At first, they maintained a respectful distance, each in their own space, interacting only when necessary for the children. But little by little, they began to share more time together. They had breakfast in the kitchen, while the babies ate in their high chairs, splashing food everywhere. They cooked dinner together, Javier cutting vegetables, while Camila seasoned the meat with spices she learned from her grandmother. They watched movies in the living room after putting the children to bed, commenting on silly scenes and laughing at bad jokes. They went for walks in the park on Sundays, pushing the double stroller while the fresh breeze of Mérida caressed their faces. The neighbors already knew them as a family. Doña Lucia always asked about the twins and congratulated Camila on how good the children looked. Don Roberto gave them popsicles for everyone, including one for Camila, who could now eat sweets without feeling guilt. No one questioned the situation, because what they saw was simply love. A good man, a brave woman, and 2 happy children. That was all that mattered. Javier discovered he enjoyed Camila's company more than he expected. She was intelligent, had a subtle sense of humor that surprised him, and spoke of her future dreams with a passion that inspired him. She was no longer just the mother of his adopted children. She was his friend, his ally, his partner in this adventure of raising a family. Camila had also noticed changes in herself that went beyond the physical. For the first time in years, she felt safe. She didn't have to worry about where she would sleep that night or where her next meal would come from. She didn't have to walk kilometers under the burning sun, looking for her lost babies. She could simply exist, breathe, dream. She had started therapy with a psychologist Javier got for her, a kind woman named Sophia, who helped her process the trauma of having lived on the streets and having been separated from her children. The sessions were difficult. They forced her to face painful memories she preferred to keep buried. But they were also liberating. She was learning that what happened to her wasn't her fault, that losing her job and becoming homeless didn't make her a bad person, that signing those papers at the hospital when she was confused didn't mean she didn't love her children. She was learning to forgive herself, and with that forgiveness came a new strength. She had signed up as a volunteer at a homeless shelter 2 afternoons a week, helping serve food and organizing clothing donations. She wanted to give back the help others gave her when she needed it most. Javier supported her completely in everything. He bought her the books she needed for school. He gave her a small monthly salary so she had her own money and didn't feel dependent. He encouraged her to pursue her goals no matter how long it took. And without either of them saying it out loud, both knew their relationship was transforming into something deeper. One afternoon in December, while decorating the house for Christmas, something happened that changed everything. Camila was up on a ladder, hanging lights on the tree Javier had bought, a huge pine that filled the living room with a forest scent. Mateo and Victoria played in their playpen nearby, fascinated with the shiny ornaments reflecting the light. Javier held the ladder to ensure Camila didn't fall. She reached out her arm, trying to reach the highest branch, but lost her balance slightly. Javier reacted instinctively, going up a step to hold her by the waist and stabilize her. Their faces were inches apart. Time seemed to stop. Camila looked down and found Javier's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that left her breathless. It wasn't the look of a friend. It was the look of a man who felt something much deeper. She felt her heart beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. Javier realized how close they were and quickly took a step back, clearing his throat uncomfortably. Camila came down from the ladder with blushing cheeks. Neither said anything about what had just happened, but both felt it. That night, Javier couldn't sleep. He paced his room, realizing something he had been denying for weeks. He had fallen in love with Camila, not out of pity or convenience, but because she was an extraordinary woman who inspired him every day. Because when he saw her smile, he felt the world was a better place. The following days were strange. Javier and Camila moved around each other with a new awareness that didn't exist before. He noticed things he had never paid attention to, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating on reading, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she truly laughed, the melodious sound of her voice when she sang to the babies before sleeping. Camila also noticed details about Javier that made her feel butterflies in her stomach. The infinite patience with which he cleaned the messes the babies made in the kitchen, the tenderness with which he kissed Mateo and Victoria's foreheads every night, the way he looked at her when he thought she didn't notice, with a mixture of admiration and something that looked a lot like adoration. But neither dared to say anything. Camila was afraid of ruining what they had built. She was afraid Javier only felt pity for her, or a sense of responsibility. Javier was afraid of pressuring her when she was barely recovering from the years of trauma. He was afraid she would think he expected something in return for all the help he had given her, so they continued in that uncomfortable limbo, wanting something more, but without daring to reach for it. Until one January night, while having dinner in the kitchen after putting the children to bed, Camila finally gathered the courage to speak. She told Javier she needed to tell him something important. He left his fork on the plate and gave her his full attention. And Camila took a deep breath before opening her heart completely. Camila began with a trembling but determined voice. She told Javier that the last few months had been the happiest of her entire life, that she had recovered not only her children, but also her dignity, her hope, her sense of purpose, and that she owed all of that to him, to his limitless kindness, his infinite patience, his ability to see beyond appearances and give her a chance when the rest of the world had discarded her. She told him that at first she only felt gratitude, immense, overwhelming gratitude, which made her cry with happiness every night before sleeping, but that with time, that gratitude had transformed into something different, something that scared her and excited her at the same time. She had started noticing him in ways she shouldn't, missing him when he went out to work, even if it was just for a few hours, looking for excuses to stay longer in the living room when they watched movies together, imagining what her life would be like if he weren't in it, and feeling a painful emptiness in her chest. Camila paused, gathering the courage to say the hardest words of her life. She confessed she had fallen in love with him, that she didn't expect him to feel the same, that she understood perfectly if this changed their dynamic and they needed to establish new boundaries. But she couldn't keep those feelings inside because they were consuming her. She finished her confession with tears in her eyes, expecting the worst. Javier looked at her with an expression Camila couldn't decipher. The silence stretched between them for several seconds that felt like an eternity. Camila was about to get up and flee to her room when Javier finally spoke. His voice came out hoarse, full of contained emotion. He told her he had been waiting weeks to find the right moment to tell her exactly the same thing. That he had fallen in love with her in a way he never experienced with any woman in his 46 years of life. That at first he thought it was just admiration for her strength and her unbreakable spirit. But he quickly realized it was much deeper than that. He told her he loved the way she transformed the house into a true home, with her laughter and energy. That he loved how she treated the babies with a tenderness that melted his heart. That he loved her humility despite everything she had suffered. That he loved her ambition to be better every day. That he loved the fact that she never asked him for material things. That the only thing that mattered to her was being close to her children and building a dignified life. Javier got up from his chair, walked around the table, and knelt in front of Camila, taking her hands in his. He told her with a firm and clear voice that he was completely, irrevocably, eternally in love with her. That he wanted to build a life together, not just as co-parents, but as a couple, as husband and wife if she accepted. Camila couldn't believe what she was hearing. Tears ran freely down her cheeks as she looked at this extraordinary man, kneeling in front of her, offering her everything she ever dreamed of, but never believed she deserved. She asked him with a broken voice if he was sure, if he really wanted to tie himself to a woman with her past, with her scars, with all the emotional baggage she carried. Javier smiled tenderly and told her he wasn't asking her to marry him in spite of her past. He was asking her to marry him precisely because of everything she had lived, because her past had turned her into the strong, compassionate, and brave woman she was today, because she had survived things that would have destroyed weaker people, because she had found a way to keep loving when the world gave her 1,000 reasons to fill her heart with bitterness. Because when he looked at Camila, he didn't see a broken woman. He saw a warrior who had fought impossible battles and emerged victorious. He told her it would be an honor to spend the rest of his life loving her, supporting her, building dreams together. That Mateo and Victoria deserved to grow up in a home where their parents truly loved each other, not just coexisted out of obligation. That he wanted to give her his last name, make it official to the world that she was his family in every sense. Camila sobbed so hard she could barely breathe. With a trembling voice, she whispered a yes that came straight from the bottom of her soul. A yes that meant believing in happy endings again. Javier stood up and hugged her tightly, feeling her body shake against his. They stayed like that for long minutes, simply holding each other, letting the reality of what just happened settle in their hearts. When they finally separated, Javier told her he wanted to do things right, that he would court her properly, even though they lived under the same roof, that they would go on romantic dates, that they would get to know each other on deeper levels, that they would build their relationship on solid foundations of respect and communication. Camila laughed through tears and told him he had already courted her for months without realizing it, that every time he made her favorite coffee without her asking, that every time he left encouraging notes in her school notebook, that every time he defended her when she doubted her own capabilities, all that had been his way of loving her without saying it out loud. Javier smiled, recognizing she was right. That night they stayed up late on the living room sofa, talking about future plans, shared dreams, the family they would continue building together. Camila rested her head on Javier's shoulder and felt a peace she never believed possible. She had gone from sleeping on cold park benches to being in the arms of the man she loved. She had gone from desperately searching for her lost babies to seeing them grow safe and happy every day. Fate had been cruel to her for years, but finally, it was giving her everything she deserved all along. The following months were preparations for the wedding. They decided to do something simple and intimate, only with the most important people. Rosa, the nurse who helped Javier in the first months, cried with happiness when they gave her the news. Dr. Mendez accepted to be a witness because she felt part of this extraordinary story. Sophia, Camila's psychologist, was also present because she had accompanied her healing step by step. The ceremony took place in the mansion's garden on a golden April afternoon, under an arch decorated with white and orange flowers that scented the air. Camila wore a simple ivory dress Javier bought her at a downtown boutique. Nothing flashy, just elegant and comfortable. She wore her hair down with small flowers intertwined. Javier wore a light linen suit, perfect for Mérida's warm climate. But the true protagonists were Mateo and Victoria, who were now a year and 3 months old. Mateo walked wobbling with clumsy steps, fascinated with his little suit. Victoria preferred to be carried, observing everything with those intelligent eyes. When the judge asked if Javier accepted Camila as his wife, he responded with a firm voice, full of conviction. When he asked Camila, she could barely whisper her yes through tears of happiness. They kissed under the sun of Mérida, while their friends applauded and the babies laughed without understanding, but feeling the joy in the air. In that moment, Javier understood something fundamental. Adopting those babies that day wasn't a coincidence. It was the universe guiding him toward the destiny that was always written for him. 3 years later, the family had grown in love and size. Camila had graduated as a nurse with honors, worked in the same hospital where her children were born, helping other mothers in difficult situations. Javier had reduced his work hours to spend more time with his family, discovering that true wealth was not in profits, but in his children's hugs before sleeping. Mateo was a curious 4-year-old boy who asked about everything and dreamed of being an astronaut. Victoria was a brilliant girl who loved books and was already starting to read simple words. One quiet night, after putting the children to bed, Javier and Camila sat on the balcony of their room, looking at the stars over the Mérida sky. She rested her head on his shoulder while he hugged her by the waist. Camila whispered that sometimes she still couldn't believe all this was real, that 4 years ago she slept on the streets with no hope for the future, and now she had everything she ever dreamed of. Javier kissed her forehead tenderly and told her she had turned his empty house into a home full of life, that she had filled his lonely heart with unconditional love, that the babies he adopted led him to her, and she led him back to life. They remained in silence, hugging, listening to their children's quiet breathing in the room next door. And both knew with certainty that fate makes no mistakes when it unites people who are made to love each other. If this story touched your heart, Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that miracles exist and that true love always finds its way. Remember that in the darkest moments of your life, when everything seems lost and meaningless, God is preparing blessings you didn't even imagine. He never abandons his children and always has a perfect plan to reunite families the world tries to separate. May God bless your life with the same love and mercy that blessed the story of Javier, Camila, Mateo, and Victoria. Amen.